Great. So welcome everyone to the sort of second OpenMusic Study Group. The idea I had for this was to more or less kind of meet sort of once every 2 weeks and sort of just go through a different parameter and of sort of musical structure in OM, and sort of as a group sort of write a piece of music. So anyone who's maybe new to OM can get an idea of what's possible and can sort of follow along with the video and see and get started really. So the first thing for me, I always start with rhythm. So I thought that'd be a good place to start. Is there anyone who's composed a lot with kind of OpenMusic rhythms and things before?
Me.
Yeah. Good. So anyway, if you want to jump in and say, oh, let's try this, or I like when we do this, feel free. This is going to be informal, and we're just going to see where it takes us. So in OM, for me, one of the easiest things I find for getting started is using sort of rhythmic values to start generating ideas. Has anyone else got some experience in kind of gauging with sort of rhythmic values in OM?
Yes.
A little bit, just a little bit.
Do you know what I mean when I say rhythmic values? Is there anyone?
You mean about trees?
No, almost, not trees just yet. I find, because in OM, there's kind of 3 ways of dealing with rhythm. There's durational values in seconds. There's rhythmic values, which are I like to think of them the way, you know, how Americans talk about musical notes, the quarter note, the 8th note, the 16th note. So those kind of rhythmic values can be used to generate rhythm. And as you said, the rhythm trees are kind of OM's sort of 3rd way of dealing with rhythms. So I'm just going to, as people join, I'm going to just add them, and we'll see how many we are, but I'm going to keep going. So one of the functions that turns rhythmic values into a tree is the make tree function. So if we see in the top on my screen, I've just stuck in a couple of quarter note values into OM with the rhythmic tree, make tree function sort of wants a time signature. So we give it 4/4. And we see we get 3 crotchets. So you can more or less add as many rhythmic values as you want. So, you know, there's our basic rhythms. In OM, because it's working with fractions, we can start to do some more interesting things, because obviously we know sort of a quarter, an 8th, a 16th, 1/32 is fairly straightforward. But if we put in a 3rd, you know, it's a sort of a rhythmic value that we're not really used to thinking about, because most of our Western classical music is in sort of rational time, so divisables of 2. So we see, oh, it needs to be a list. If you get
sorry, Alan, may I ask
yes,
this question?
no, jump in.
Which is this object where you actually get the notes written? How I get that object?
This is the voice object.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
yeah, if you click on a function and press D, it brings you up to the hi. I said this before. We've kind of started. I'm just gonna kind of keep going, because we're recording. So I'm gonna just be admitting people, and we've only just started. So if you want to say hi, what have I missed? This is going to be fairly informal, so feel free to kind of just interrupt. So if you highlight the function or the object and press D, it'll bring you to this, which more or less tells you what the little inlets are going to want to see. So we can see in the voice object, the second inlet wants to have a tree. So that's why we're in it from our make tree going into our voice object. You see I got an error there when I tried to evaluate that. That's because the make tree function, it wants to have a list. So we can see I've just put it in as a third, but we want to have that in a list format. And in OpenMusic, because it's sort of written in Lisp, our lists are going to be in brackets. So if I put a parentheses around that third, we now see that our third now becomes a crotchet tied to a sort of tuplet third. And we can, I find this is quite an easy way to get started with rhythm. If we wanted to just build a rhythmic passage, I find if you want something to happen a lot of times, repeat n is a really helpful function, because it will pretty much repeat anything a number of times that you want it to. So if I put in 10, it's gonna do something 10 times. So if I want to give it a list of rhythmic values, 6, just to get us started, plugging that into OM will just, can we see the OM listener? Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we plug that in, we see it's going to take that list and repeat it 10 times. If I wanted just to pick out one single rhythmic value from this, this is a nice helpful function if you just want to pick one item, the nth random. So if I kind of have this in between, we see now it gives us 10 numbers randomly selected from that. And if we plug that into our make tree, we can get a kind of funky rhythmic passage, which
so excuse me, here you have 10 values who are random, take by random on this list. This is it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So we can see the sort of the flow of the sort of the data is, we start up here, our nth random then picks a random object, but because we've got it into the repeat n, which is going to do something 10 times, it's going to keep on asking this function 10 times for a random number. So it's going to keep selecting random. Our make tree function is going to then take the list that comes out of this, put it into 4/4 as sort of the time signature of 4/4, and then put it out as a tree.
Yeah, but what do MK tree? Because if the repeat is directly on the voice, it doesn't work. What the make tree does exactly?
The make tree, it's, let me see. So we get our, so it asked for, if we click on make tree and press D, we can sort of just unpack what it's doing here. So it's taking a list of what they're calling integer ratios. So the, and then by, because we've given it the time signature 4/4, it's working out the rhythmic our sort of ratio values into rhythmic values of 4/4 and crotchet equals 60, I think is the default. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So now that, because we know it's 4/4, we're actually giving it a rational time signature here.
Yeah.
We don't, one of the best things about OM is we don't need to make it a rational time signature. We can make it an irrational time signature and see what that means. So we see now the our 4/4 is now 3/5, and it's taken our old list, a random list, and rearranged it for us without having to work out exactly what's happening.
If we did the same thing but without the MK tree, we will have the different notes, but without the time signature.
So we need, because the voice wants to have it as a rhythm tree, we need the make tree in order to transform our list of values into a tree. And we'll talk about the tree and what that what that means in OM. But this is the way. This is sort of a nice, easy way to start unpacking of what's actually going on, because we've got our rhythmic values are rearranged into many different ways. The durational value is exactly the same. So if I play this, I mean, I'll maybe pick. So I'll not play it all, but that's what it sounds like in 3/5, but in 4/4, it'll sound exactly this. Well, this might have refreshed, but it should sound exactly the same. So even though our rhythmic values have changed, the actual sorry, I need to, what I'm doing there is I'm actually locking the patch. So I'm pressing B on the function, which brings up a little blue X. So it means that no matter how many times I ask it to do something, it's no longer random. It's gonna just give me the same rhythm, so we can compare them. So that's just the start of the 5/3. In our 4/4, it will. So our durational value hasn't changed, but the the rhythmic value has, if that makes sense to everyone.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of a very kind of quick and easy way of getting sort of started with rhythm. Does anyone want to tell us a little bit about how they would start sort of playing with rhythm, using rhythm trees, or sort of what's anyone's sort of starting point for rhythm? And we can sort of have a look at that and see what's going on. Does anyone want to volunteer their compositional technique?
I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I think maybe Carlos, I'm throwing the balloon. I must say that that's one of my interests in this session today, to understand a little bit more, because normally I finish scores in finale, even if I start in OpenMusic, some kinds of the rhythmic manipulation through durations and not by rhythm. So that's why I wanted to understand after 20 years in OpenMusic.
Oh, really?
Finally.
It's not too complicated. There's a lot of just getting your head around the different sort of what's happening and how OpenMusic is interpreting sort of what we traditionally, because when we write music, we don't need to think of, you know, a crotchet being a quarter value of the time signature we're in. But in OM, we need to kind of think about music a bit more in mathematical terms. Certainly I do. But the main thing about, let me actually bring up, there was an example I found. Oh, it's not that one. I was just kind of, before this, I started sort of playing about and sort of looking at different ways of generating rhythm in OM. So we talked about sort of using rhythmic values. The durational values is another way. So that is where we think about things in terms of sort of seconds or milliseconds, really, in order to get a rhythmic value. So in this, I've sort of jumped straight in to sort of save me typing out the whole thing. But to quickly explain what's happening here, we used this little function before, the top, the random and the repeat. So I've done this to give me 6 values in milliseconds. So 100 milliseconds, 100, 200, 100, 200. This little thing is when there's a file I just built for adding lists. I keep forgetting. I keep meaning to sort of put it as an actual loop in OM, but I can never get it to work. But it's basically this little function here. We can see just this loop for blah, 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 collect. So if that's just a little Lisp file that you can then import to OM. and what it does is very simply add up the next number to the previous. So 100 plus 100, 200 plus 200, 400, etc. And what that does is it gives us the total durational value of the phrase, which is we see this, what we're going into is called the chord sequence. So to get that, it's just chord seq. And if we look at the documentation for that, we can see the slots just want either a chord object, another chord object, a list of pitches, onsets, and durations. So the way I've done that is we have our list, and by adding those together, we get our kind of total duration, the 111 milliseconds into the first outlet. The second outlet, we want to actually see the different individual rhythmic values of the milliseconds. So by plugging that all in, I've just got a little random note. I think we'll talk about pitch next week, but it's more or less giving me a random set of notes, just so that we're not just hearing middle C constantly. And when I plug those all, we get this. So something a little bit more musical. But obviously, it's getting it from a durational value back into something of a rhythmic value, which we could write in a score. We need to sort of play about a little bit. So please stop me if you want me to explain something a little bit further.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of playing about, because we have in our chord sequence, we have a very different, the chord sequence wants a very different data type than the voice object. So that's why obviously for durational values, you wouldn't put in durational values into a voice object, because it just doesn't want to interpret music in that way. It'll just give you an error, and you'll not be able to use it. The chord sequence does. So we've managed to sort of get a little musical phrase into our chord sequence. But in order to take that information and transform it into a way that the voice box can do something, this is where the kind of magic happens here. So the first thing I've done here is more or less turned our seconds into sort of a fraction. So we've got our, because we've got 100 milliseconds, we want to divide that by 1,000 to give us the kind of fraction seconds. So obviously a tenth, a fifth, etc. And that's now something that Maketree can do something with, which we already looked at. I'm just going to take that out for a second. So we see I've put it into 4/4, and this is just the note values. So our note values coming from the chord sequence, it don't need to be adjusted in any way. The chord sequence and the voice object both understand notes the same way, so we can just put one into the other. And we see this is what happens when we play it back. Which isn't exactly the same as what we had before. It's a lot slower, and that's because the default is just crotchet equals 60. So we need to adjust the speed, the tempo for our voice, so that it now mirrors what we had originally. And one thing that I find is, if we look at the kind of the total, if you ever want to see what's inside a function, if you click print and plug that into an object and evaluate it by pressing V, highlighting it, pressing V, in your voice, in your listener, it will put out what's coming out. So we can see the value I want from this is the total duration of the phrase. So in this case, the entire phrase is 1100 milliseconds. So the way to get that is, this is slightly verging on the deeper sort of Common Lisp coding side of OpenMusic. We have a list, so we want we're only really interested in the last element of that list. So in Lisp, there's a function called last, and funnily enough, which will just take the last element of a list. So if we wanted the last value in our random duration, we just plug in last, and we can see that 200 was indeed the last value. So we get our last out of our total durational value, but because it's in a list, certain mathematical objects or functions in the list don't want to deal with things as lists. They want to have them as just a straight value. So in OpenMusic, we have integers, floats, and and strings, which is pretty much the same for most coding languages. And we see that these things exist we can type them into our patch really without any problems. And in OpenMusic, because we're in Lisp, a list of things will also be accepted. If it's not a function like voice or repeat n, OpenMusic will look for it and not find it. So if we don't put a string, if we don't make our site and we type hello, it'll just say over in our OM listener, the function hello does not exist. But if we type it as a string, we're pretty much telling OM, this is a string and I don't want you to, it's not a function, so don't go looking for something. And that's why it can exist. But we want our list to become an integer. And we do that by using the car function. This is something that's from Common Lisp, where when you're dealing with sort of when you're dealing with lists, there's ways of getting, like we said in last, we want the last item from it. The car the function will take the first item. So number 1. Curter is will take everything except the first item. So there's our 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll not go too much more deeper into that for now. But it's more of a programming side of it rather than a musical. But all that's just to get a roundabout way of saying we've got our list, and if we add a car function to that, it removes the brackets, okay? Which now gives us an integer. If we do, for whatever reason, I need to look into it. Sort of 4 seconds seems to be the default value of a voice box or a voice object. So if we divide our rhythmic phrase by 400, we get a funny fraction, but we want that in sort of seconds. So if we turn that into a float, which is more or less a decimal point, we can then multiply that by 60 to give us our new tempo, and we can see it's much closer to. There's more articulation in the chord sequence, but that's because it's not dealing with music in rhythmic values. We're just taking more or less what would appear on a score, the rhythmic values, and presenting them that way. Yeah, so that's dealing with that's sort of the two ways, two sort of fastest ways of sort of generating sort of rhythmic phrases in OM, through just random rhythmic values and random durational values, but presenting them in OM. Does anyone want to ask any questions, or is that clear? Is there anything you want me to?
It's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah.
The way a lot of in OM, there's what's called the pulse maker, which is a way of generating music, a way of generating rhythmic values just as a little function. Has anyone used this before? The pulse maker is quite a...
No.
No? So this... Yeah?
Can I show something?
Yeah.
Just... can I share my screen just to show 2 patches?
Yeah, work away.
Okay, so to give a different...
let me see. Does it need me to give you permission?
I think you must.
Okay. Let me see. Maybe I need to go into my... I can't see where it'll let me share.
Maybe I have
is
to
it, if it's a patch? Are you on the Discord?
I think you can share your screen.
I think you have to stop your share.
Oh, I have to stop.
Yeah. You stop your share, and you can
Well,
do it without permission.
Okay.
Ah, perfect.
Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So I'll just show 2 different approaches in these 2 patches. This first one, what I did, I have here a short second sorry, where I arrange sort of by hand, not very precise, a sort of rhythmic values by the durations or the distance between each onset of these notes. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what I do after, I quantize this with this OM quantify. I have a rhythmic sequence here, and here I have a note sequence, and I'll combine them together like an isorhythmic motet, sort of. So I have here the results of this, of the distance between each onset quantized into rhythmic values. With this object on quantify.
Could you just explain the OM
Yes,
quantify?
yes.
Just what sort of those values that you're putting
Okay,
into?
Here I wrote this by hand, this sequence of notes, but the notes are really not important here. I'm not using these notes. I'm just using the distance in milliseconds between each note. Okay? So with this object, I will have, it will convert absolute points to the distance between the points with this x to dx object. Okay?
Sure.
So from here, I will have.
Would you be able to bring up your OM listener and sort of
Yes,
show
yes,
us
yes. I'm just looking
values
for it.
that
I have too many windows open here. Sorry.
It's okay. I always Command Shift L should bring it right to the top.
Okay. So let me put this in a way. This one goes on. Okay, this is the distance in milliseconds between each onset. Okay, so I'm taking this information here from the third alphabet, which is the least onset and least duration. So there are these two values. One is the duration of each note, which is here is the same, and the distance between each onset, which will also translate into the duration of the notes. Okay, here. This is what comes here. So if I evaluate here on this, I get this. This is the absolute onset from 0. Okay. Let me do it again. This is the absolute onset from 0, and this is the distance between each point. Okay.
Yeah. So it's what I was doing, but in reverse. So I was generating and then from that deriving the absolute onsets. But your
here
next,
I'm putting in this list, I'm putting this value before all of these ones because I want to make a sort of a canon. Okay. So this is why this sequence will start with these two rests, which is 1500 milliseconds, in which by quantizing on this tempo will give me these rhythmic values. Okay, so the sequence will start here with this rest, which is this value I inserted before.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the note, the note part. This is just for transposing this sequence. Okay, I'm transposing by a fifth below here because I'm using the same sequence for the first voice here. So these two voices will have different rhythm, but the same note sequence. This is a note sequence of voice 1. This is note sequence of voice. Where are you going? Oh, here. Sorry. Voice 2. Okay. So as you can see, the rhythm is different, but the notes are the same, but this voice is transposed 1/5 below, okay? This voice here. Am I being clear?
Yeah, yeah, very clear
okay.
for me.
So what I do in both voices is repeat the process, okay? So this is the same rhythm. Wait, this is here. Is a different rhythm, okay?
Your OM quantify, could you just talk a little bit about what's, why you picked those numbers and
okay,
what it's doing?
Of course, this is the durations. OM quantify has many possibilities. I'm just using this. In the first inlet, I will give the durations, the absolute durations in milliseconds, okay? This is the tempo, which will be 60 here in the metronomic tempo here, you see, okay? And I'm using these inlets to say that in the quantization, I don't want to have seventh tuplets and fifth and fifth tuplets, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I can use 3, 6, 8, but I don't want to have 7, no 5. If I remove this here,
mm-hmm.
I will have, you see 7 here?
Yeah.
Okay. And I can say that I don't want, sorry. Why there is no undo on OpenMusic? Forbid, you see?
I know.
Forbid, it's the, I can say I don't want to have just 5, but I'm okay with 7. You say, I don't want 5, I don't want 3. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's quite simple, this. So what comes here is it's the rhythmic 3. You see here?
Yeah.
The rhythmic 3 that this object, this voice will need. So I input the rhythmic 3 here, and here the note sequence. And this is the result of the note sequence plus the rhythmic 3. Here is the same thing. I have the same okay, I remember now what I did. Sorry. I multiplied every onset by 2. So it's a rhythmic augmentation, okay? The second voice. I did this special a long time ago, so I didn't remember exactly what was going on, but now I know. So this is the same rhythm with all values multiplied by 2, which will give me the double values, or what would be an augmentation of the rhythm. And the process is the same. I'll pick these notes here, and I'll combine these notes with this rhythmic 3. And at the end, I will make a list of these 2 objects, and I will put them into a poly to get my canon, okay? It doesn't sound very bad, but I cannot play this because MIDI is awful in OpenMusic.
Yeah.
Each time I install a new version or change the system, it's a mess. So this was playing before, but I installed Catalina on my Mac 2 weeks ago, and this stopped working. I have no MIDI here, but no problem. I have a score. I can export. I can do whatever I want. Okay.
Great. Yeah, really interesting. Thanks for sharing.
I can share this patch with you if you want. Okay.
Please.
Of course I can.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
And I can. Okay. The other approach is different, but it's funny, I think. I'm using the same thing you did with this. No, not this. With this rhythmic 3. You're using a moment ago with repeat and all this, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what I did, I made 5 different rhythmic cells with this approach, okay? Each one was made by a rhythmic 3, you see, with these fractions, the same way you did.
Yeah. And
I built this sort of rhythmic cell combinator. It's not finished this, but the idea is to have 5 inputs, 5 inlets here. And the number I put here will correspond to the rhythmic cell I want to have. Let's say 1, 1, 1, 1. Okay? So I will have cell 1 plus cell 1 plus cell 1 plus cell 1, which will give me this here. Okay? Let us say I want cell 1, after I want cell 2, then cell 1, then cell 3. Okay? This is not yet finished, but it's a sort of the idea is to define the number of times each cell will appear on its turn. So I will have
it means that you have 2 times the second cell.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I want cell 1 2 times.
And 2 times the second
then
cell.
I want cell,
Okay.
for instance,
Okay.
5 3 times.
Okay.
Then I want cell 1. Then I want cell 3. You see what I mean? So when I okay.
Okay.
I was thinking about something like Stravinsky or something like that, to have multiple cells and combine them in a pattern.
Okay.
This is not finished, but what I do, I copied these cells into this patch. The idea would be to connect them directly, but it's not finished. But this number will control a repeat for the cell. Okay, so here is the cell. If I define a repeat, the cell will be transformed into the number of repetitions defined by what I enter here. So, and this model here, it's just some conditional stuff to pick the cell with OMIF and some conditions to define the path. I will share obviously this with you also if you want to.
Thanks very much.
Further. And
No,
this is it.
That's really
I will
great.
just look for the patches now because I cannot just drag them into the window like a normal file of a computer. So I will have to go to my workspace. I will put them in the chat window. Okay.
Perfect.
Great.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you.
You can now. I'm giving the screen back to you as soon as I can.
Thank you.
Because,
I think I can
okay.
I have control.
Okay, thank you.
No, that's really, Carlos, thank you very much for that. It's really, really helpful. Does anyone else have a patch that they'd maybe want to, or any questions? Anyone kind of working on something that they'd maybe want to have looked at or to discuss? Or do you want me to just open up another patch and we can look at another function just quickly? Well, let me get into, so, well, let's look at one thing that I was sort of thinking about was, does anyone have any experience composing with kind of metric modulations?
Sorry?
Does anyone? Yeah, and metric modulations. Does anyone write music with metric modulations, or anyone with an interest in metric modulations?
Yes.
Yes.
So let's have a look and sort of see about getting OM to do all the hard work in metric modulation.
Nice.
So maybe instead of looking at what I've done, let's just make one ourselves. So I'm just going to open up is a particular kind of rhythmic approach that we've looked at that you'd like to kind of be the basis for our metric modulation? Do you want it to be sort of random rhythmic values or durational, do you think? We'll have a quick, anyone can pick rhythm or duration. Carlos, what would you like?
Duration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's just make it. Oh, one to copy. There we go. Well, we'll take. So we've got. We'll give it a couple more values to make it a little bit more interesting. So we'll just give it. Is there any number that someone wants to shout out that they really want to see in a OM patch, or you're happy with me just picking random numbers that fall under my fingers? Okay. So we have, I'll unlock that. So one thing that you can do is if you either Apple or Control Shift and press E, you just throw everything nicely into a little patch that you don't have to think about. So, you know, here we have our patch and the number of rhythms that we want. So, whoever sort of likes to use metric modulation, once you've got a rhythmic value, what's the next thing that you would do to try and work out what you're modulating from to what you're modulating to? Anybody want to jump in, or do you want me just to lead?
Lead.
So, well, we want to, I need to look up my patch for metric modulation. The one thing that I did was look at, okay, in our voice object, if we bring up our print function again, we can see our tempo. It gives us a quarter note and 160. So we can see that this is our tempo. So for a metric modulation, we want to sort of first of all turn this into something useful for us in OpenMusic. So we looked at the car function, which brings us down to our list. In fact, oh, thank you. Got those messages in the chat, or those patches in the chat. If we just apply a car to our first car, we can see that we get our quarter, a rhythmic value of crotchet. And if we add the quarter, we then get our 160. But of course, we want these as integers because we want to do some mathematics with them. So if I just add another car to that, you can remove the parentheses. There is, because this is sort of getting into the common list code of things, you can't, there's the A's and D's and R's all kind of correspond to things. So if you type 2A's, you'll get the car of the car. So we see, if I take my value there, we get our quarter, which is the same as adding a card or a car. CDAR will give us the car of the curder, or the curder of, yeah. So instead of having these things sort of endlessly kind of strung together, if we know what we need, we can sort of clean up our patches a little bit by just using exactly what we need. So if you're, you know, for experimenting, you can kind of string car and curders together until you get what you want, and then you can sort of truncate all that down into the single function that will do the job you want it to do. So now we have our quarter note and our 160 seconds. Does anyone want to say sort of what I should do with these two values now? There's no, you can we can make this an experiment, and we can multiply them together, we can add them together, we can divide them, see what happens. What would you like to see me do?
You choose.
Well, let's divide them. So we see we can take, we're using OM divide. We can get a mathematical function. OM star will multiply. OM plus and OM minus gives us all just different things that we can experiment with. So if we take these two and just divide them, we get something that's probably not that useful. If we multiply them, you know, we get 40, which would be the whole note value of our phrase. So we have, you know, if a quarter is equal to 160, then 1 is equal to 40. Does that make sense? Do you follow my, let's see, so if we look at what we used previously, you know, we've got our voice object. So our quarter note 160. So if we change this to a 1, this value will be the equivalent of a whole note in our rhythmic, in our crotchet equals 160. So what would we'd like to modulate to? So in for rhythmic modulation, we want to pick in our function we've got a lot of fifths. So let's see if we can pick a random note from our I'm just going to take that. So our output here is going to be a random rhythmic value from our previous phrase. So if we then multiply our whole note value by one of the notes here. That's way too big. So divide. Yeah. We get our tempo value based from the from one of the random notes from our previous. So we can see, well, we're not getting our rhythm. Sorry. I'm just gonna, stick a few rhythms, sort of makes it a bit more interesting. So there, so we have a little bit of I'm not sure if people saw in Carlos's patch, the concat function is a nice quick way of just adding two things together. So if we want to add some rhythmic ideas together, we can use the concat function to concatenate two ideas. And here we can see our old tempo and then our new tempo for the rhythm. So we can do that, and we can do that for, now that we've got this little patch here, we can copy and paste that into kind of any number of patches that we want to do. Antonio, do you have any you sort of said you did some metric modulation. Is there anything you'd want me to change or add to what we've just done?
No, just following. I must say that when I made some metric modulation, it's more by hand. That's why I wanted to understand a little bit better how, because I used a lot, like Carlos, the OM quantify objects, but I wanted to understand a little bit better how to use all the others. So
yeah.
But it's just following. Yes, it's nice.
Is there anything you do differently when you're working things out by hand?
No, it's more a kind of mixed approach. You know, there are mainly as I use more on the note side. I think my approach in OpenMusic through the rhythmic part, rhythmic, not duration, it's more rather basic. Because anytime you have the time to do something, you must write the work. and when you should be studying, you must do something else. So that's why this is fantastic to just to allow to get there. I had some problems in the concat, but some years ago I tried to make some reconstructions on Messiaen and some others, just to make a little bit. And sometimes I had problems in dealing with the metronomical part because in the voice object it loses the chain. I mean, I could have in individual voices the metronomic value saved, but when I made concatenations, it would create a kind of mess. So I don't know if now it's okay. That's once again my interest in the.
It would be interesting to sort of see the patch and see what was going on. It could have been a bug that maybe got fixed, or
I think.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think someone agreed with me just saying that it was a bug that got fixed.
Yeah, probably.
So, because certainly, I mean, certainly the concat now just.
I think it works pretty well.
It works. Yeah, we've got two very different. We can attach two very different rhythmic phrases together quite easily. Certainly, I've found them really helpful. I'm thinking we're coming up to really the hour mark. Is there anything, any questions or anything someone would like to ask or go over, or?
No, it's okay.
I think that. Is there anything that someone sort of had a particular interest in, sort of pertaining to rhythm anyway, for just this one? I think next, or in 2 weeks' time, we'll start to really dig into sort of pitch as a parameter, and how OpenMusic can deal with that.
I'm interested on one subject, but is nothing with the rhythm, is a spectral approach with SDIF format. That would be very interesting if it's interesting someone else to have some look around about it. But I don't know if it's interesting for you.
No, I mean, we want to keep this sort of informal and just kind of, if there's something that, someone else has maybe someone else has experimented with it, and maybe their patch hasn't worked, and, we can talk about it. And, the fact that we now know we can share each other's screens and things, I'm still getting used to this layout. Matthias, was there something you wanted to ask there?
Yes, I want to know if in the next lesson we can work with Lisp code and do some object.
You like building our own?
Yes.
It's definitely, yeah. I mean, I'll look at some of the things that I've done and sort of.
Okay.
Do you mean mostly for the things that I use? I would use the lambda function to kind of put stuff in. I know there's. Are you thinking maybe about building your own little function within, or just sort of the lambda kind of just getting Lisp code into the patch?
Yeah, it's about that, to make object.
Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely. I've used a couple of things in my own music that uses a lambda function to bring in little ideas. I mean, if you have a chunk of code, I sort of showed it for my lazy function that I didn't, the add by list that I just was too lazy to build in loop. I mean, it's an easy way of just loading. If you write a Lisp function, you can use your load file and load the code in automatically, and that's in my computer. This is just a .lisp file for a little for loop that I could just throw in. It kind of depends what it is there's a couple of ways you can get code into Lisp. I'll certainly, with the lambda function, probably be one of it's quite a nice way that I've used it for pitch material, so we can look at that, and I'll show you the example that I used. If you're just wanting if you just want to get code into the patch to see, and you have a little function that you've built in Lisp, the way I just showed you there, the load the file, and if you just type in what you've called it, it'll appear. It's not a perfect way, because I find that I always have to revive it whenever when I close down my my workspace and then open it again. You have to kind of load the code in again, and then revive all the functions. If if you've copied and pasted a patch a couple of times, you have to go and revive each individual function. But if you're wanting just to throw code into OM, that may be a quick way that we can cover right now. But certainly the next one, I'll show you my Lambda code, and we can talk about that.
It would be interesting. I would like to understand a little bit more about Lambda code, Lambda functions. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. And that could be nice. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, the Lambda function could be used in Rhythm as well. Because we're coming up to kind of like the hour mark, I think it's a little much to start going into now, and there's so much to cover. There's so much that can be done, and it's really
I'm sorry, I didn't get. Sorry.
No, please.
Yeah, I didn't get how to get the patches of Carlos and yours, and I don't see how in the conversation. I don't know how to get it.
Oh, if you go to the chat, there should be, it might be different in yours, at the bottom of your screen, there's a button that says more, or maybe it's, or even better, do you want to share your screen and I can point you in the right direction?
You want me to share the screen?
Okay. Yeah, I think in the bottom you should be able to share your screen, and we should maybe point you in the right direction. So the
no, yes, no.
If do you have the window that's kind of got all our pictures that you can sort of see?
Sorry, I didn't get it. I have the window converse, which means where I see the messages of everyone, but I can't get the patches.
You have to scroll.
Yeah.
I scroll it. I scroll, and I saw, for example, your message, Carlos, another version of ULA 6 patch, but it's not. It's just a message. It's not a patch. Oh. maybe, I don't know.
Okay.
Would you? I'm afraid I'm not sure where I could download the patches and.
Maybe you can just send me the patches if you
Yes, I'll send you by email.
Yeah, by email. I just sent my email just now.
I have your email.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We have talked some years ago about Turin. Do you remember?
Yeah. Okay. I don't remember, but great. And like Alan, also, if you can send the example you showed today.
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carlos.
I'll share these.
Anyway, sorry.
On Facebook and a couple of other places.
Okay.
Yes. Although they are not, maybe I don't know if they will be interesting or not, but I'll send you a little address with where I've put some patches.
Perfect.
On Github. So I think some of them were published on the OpenMusic book, volume 2. In fact,
okay.
But they deal more with pitches and so on. So feel free to.
Okay. For next for the 2 weeks time, I'll definitely be. I have the OpenMusic the second volume, so I'll have to dig it out and use it.
Yes. Maybe I can show just it's very quick. Maybe I could show just for fun. I have not published that, but I can share with you. But it takes some files. If maybe I have done some years ago. Okay. It's just for the fun, I think. Some of the I am updating because I have old work in OpenMusic and then for some time I didn't use, so I had to put all of that. This was just a funny. I don't know if you see it. It's a funny thing, I think, with mode valeur et intensité, the Messiaen. As you know, I think most of you maybe know that it's a work from the 50s, which you have 3 voices, and it's a kind of it is said that it's a kind of pre-serialism work, although it's more a modal work in a certain sense. You don't have series of things, you have modes of being. It's different. And this was a kind of using OpenMusic in the sense that sorry, now I have not the name. André Riot, a composer and analyst, computer music analyst, also said once that you have the analytic tools, but you should do analysis and then synthesis to verify if your analysis is okay. So I was just using a kind of work, with mode valeur intensité. So I call it series, but it's not series. So here you have all the values you see for the of the line. So it's a description. It's not an analysis. Okay. All the I think the rhythmic and also all the modes, I don't know if you see it, durations, everything. Okay. So this is a kind of description of the piece. It's not very algorithmic, but it allowed me to do some possibilities. It was, for example, if I open this one, and you will see here, I use the, sorry, I think it's here, here, and you'll see somewhere the OM quantify, the OM quantify objects. You see, to construct. Sorry.
I think the when you've shared the patch. If you go to the share screen, we can see the changes with you.
Okay. Yes, of course. I think yes, it's okay.
It was hard for me to understand. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Now you see all my screen. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So this is the work here. I have each voice of the work. In the piano score, you see a thing more or less like this. Okay. Mm-hmm. So something like this. Okay. So here I have each voice. The amazing thing is that sometimes I tried to understand, and that is a thing you can do with OpenMusic, to go by slices. For example, this is a list only of pitches, but sometimes I could detect some symmetries, combinations, and so you can make a double approach, an analytical or a more description saying, okay, this is not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4. Okay. What was very amusing, it's that this is more or less the series applied as Messiaen did, but as you see here, I have different approaches. For example, I can use this. I think it's this one. It's not very good, but it's just for the fun, I think. And yeah. if I do the calculation, I will have all notes by order. And so what you will hear, it's not Messiaen mode valeur et intensité, but more a Michael Nyman style. Okay. So it's just for the, so this is just for the fun. Sorry, I will interrupt the, so this is just for the fun. The idea of analysis, recomposing, to see if your analytical process works and what can change if you change some parameters. It's just for fun. So if you think it's interesting, I can share with you the
yes,
Michael Nyman style. It's not very documented, but it can be fun. So
yeah, okay. I think that's one of the best things about OpenMusic is the you know, there's so the amount of kind of experimenting and playing about with just changing one thing it's so powerful, you know. Just as you said, just by sorting the notes, you can all of a sudden discover something that was kind of hidden, or just by just building a something to work out what are the absolute onset values of, you know, seeing the numbers rising in a sequence that maybe you wouldn't see in the score. It's good fun, and you can waste a lot of time.
Yes, that's the idea. So I can share with you the.
That would be really great. I would love that.
I have to leave you. Thank you very much for this. It was very nice.
I think I'm gonna end this. I think we've covered quite a lot. I think we're coming up to nearly 1 hour and a half, and I think
okay.
We've covered quite a lot, and
so it's in 2 weeks.
2 weeks. I think the 2 weeks seems to work better.
Yeah.
I sort of plan to do it weekly, but I think sustaining interest for every week might be too much for everyone. So
Yes.
2 weeks, you know, you get a break and then.
Okay, great.
I was just
Antonio,
looking before
Antonio,
we-
if you can
yes?
send your patch to my email, please.
Yes, I was just
Okay.
looking if I have
I just sent my
this.
email.
Okay, because
Okay.
I was just looking if you have. I think my question is: this is a patch that takes some patches. Okay, so. I think if I'm just going to share now with you a zip file, a little zip file, because you will find that there is, I don't know if it links everything okay, but there is a file, I think, which is the main patch, which will be mod de valeur tot. Okay, this is the main patch, and then there are the others. So I did not test it to send. But feel free to yes.
Yeah, Messiaen stole everything from you.
Sorry?
Messiaen stole everything from you.
Okay.
No, it was a joke.
Because sorry, just a last thing. Because I'm sort of recording this and putting it on YouTube, I might sort of make a little sort of file with the things that we've shared. Do you mind if I sort of make that available and sort of link to it in the YouTube box for people who maybe are going to watch the video and say, "Oh, I really wish I had this, you know, patch
Okay with me.
we talked about sharing." Carlos, you're okay?
Okay.
Antonio, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, I'm okay. Yes, maybe if I see that I can just make a patch a little bit with more comments. I will send to you just to update on YouTube or something. Okay. This
my patches.
It's not very documented, so maybe it can be nice.
My patches are commented in Portuguese, so it's an opportunity for the world to learn this beautiful language.
Yeah,
I will not translate it.
it's a good way.
Sorry.
Good way to
learn some Portuguese. Come on.
I'm much more interested in Portuguese than in OpenMusic.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop.
Thank you.
Recording.
Thank you very much.
So, and
Okay,
thank you very much.